Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. How many angels can perch on a pinhead? How many stars illuminate the night sky? How long does eternity last? While the first two questions elude me, I've discovered the answer to the third. 4 years, 3 weeks, 5 days, 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 50 seconds, more or less. I once thought "till death do us part" meant forever. Naive, wasn't I? On Friday, June 15th, at exactly 3:14 p.m., reality shredded that belief. A sheriff's deputy strode up to my desk, handed me a pristine envelope, and said simply, "You've been served." Then he vanished, leaving a silence filled by the weight of my colleagues' stares. Trembling, I unfolded the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My chest tightened, and for a fleeting moment I thought it might be the end. It wasn't. The blows didn't stop there. Attached to the petition was a restraining order, effectively barring me from entering my own home, a house I had owned before I even met Viviana. Calling her for an explanation was out of the question. The order explicitly forbade it. She swore under oath that she feared for her safety, this woman who had shared my bed the night before. Twice, or rather, I had loved her. She had simply been present. With nowhere else to go, I carried the clothes on my back to my mother's house and reclaimed my childhood room. I was dazed. Until that moment, I'd lived in the blissful ignorance of someone who believed in a future, children, old age, and the enduring companionship of a best friend. Now, everything was unraveling. The following month was an endless cycle of court hearings and financial scrutiny. Even my spending on sandwiches was dissected. It was a torment I couldn't have imagined, a level of suffering that felt as though it belonged in Dante's darkest visions. And through it all, one question haunted me. Why? When life reduces you to rubble, thinking becomes an enemy. I surrendered, agreeing to every demand. My one plea to Viviana was for an answer. She never faced me directly, choosing instead to deliver her explanation through her attorney. He handed me a letter, typed, impersonal, double-spaced. It wasn't even handwritten. From her words, I learned the brutal truth. I had done nothing wrong. Viviana had rekindled her relationship with Charles Winston III, her college sweetheart and self-proclaimed soulmate. He was the man who had taken her virginity, which she once described to me as her wedding gift. Their romance had been thwarted years ago by Charles's disapproving father. Fate intervened when the elder Winston died suddenly of a heart attack, freeing Charles to reunite with her. The letter's final line delivered the killing blow. "I'm divorcing you because I respect you too much to have an affair." Her respect left me feeling hollow and discarded. I couldn't finish reading. 2 days later, the divorce was finalized. No fault, simple, lifeless. Leaving the courthouse, I quit my job, packed up my life, and set my sights on California. Why California? Because I'd never seen the Pacific Ocean. At a Ford dealership, I traded my Mustang for a pickup truck outfitted with a camper. It would be my home for the foreseeable future. My mother begged me to stay, but I assured her that leaving was the only way I could endure. I drove west, avoiding highways in favor of back roads, with no destination beyond the horizon. My plan was simple. Find physical work that required strength but no thought, and never linger anywhere for more than 2 weeks. One evening, I rolled into a small town as the sun dipped below the skyline. A "Help Wanted" sign glowed in the window of the lone bar on Main Street. Over a beer, I inquired about the job. The bartender was hesitant, explaining that it involved long hours, minimum wage, 2 meals a day, and tips that weren't guaranteed. Beer, however, was on the house. I replied, "If there's a spot for my camper, I'll take it." He pointed to the gravel lot out back, tossed me an apron, and told me to start serving tables. That marked the beginning of my new life. On the 7th day of this journey, I met a woman 10 years my senior, still alluring in her way. That night I had intimacy for the second time in my life. It was, pleasurable. True to my plan, I moved on 2 weeks later. The bar owner, Phil, handed me an envelope with my pay and said, "You're welcome back anytime." Over the next 6 months, I drifted between diners, bars, and restaurants, working 12 different jobs. Along the way, I met women who listened to my story and offered fleeting moments of solace. None of it filled the void, but it dulled the edges. Winter arrived as I reached the Rockies. Snow fell so heavily that the world seemed to vanish into white. In desperation, I pulled into a small Colorado town, eerily still as if its residents had already retreated to warmth and safety. The only light came from the police station. I parked and explained my predicament to a deputy, who graciously let me stay in their lot. He even called a nearby diner to arrange a hot meal. The diner's owner, an older woman with a thick Italian accent, greeted me with surprising warmth. After a brief study, she said, "My grandson told me about you. You'll freeze in that camper. I have a cot in the storage room. It's not much, but it's better than the truck." Her kindness was overwhelming. I devoured the best meal I'd had in months and gratefully accepted her offer. Before dawn the next morning, I woke to the comforting sounds of Mrs. Villano cooking. My life was far from what I had envisioned, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like it was moving forward. Through the frosted window pane, a snow-covered world stretched out before me, serene and untouched. As I dressed, my eyes wandered to a tidy row of paint cans stacked against the wall. Their neat alignment piqued my curiosity, and I asked about them while exchanging pleasantries. "My late husband, bless his heart, bought those years ago," she said with a wistful smile, "but he never got around to using them, not once." Recalling my days of house painting to pay for college, I made an offer. I'd paint her place in exchange for meals. She agreed without hesitation, setting the stage for a chapter of my life I could never have foreseen. In return for room, board, and some kitchen help during lunch hours, I'd transform her restaurant. Every morning I climbed a ladder and scrubbed the tin ceiling clean, preparing it for a vibrant makeover. For 5 days straight, I painted bold, striking colors that turned the space into something spectacular, so stunning it could rival a masterpiece. One afternoon she clasped her hands in delight and exclaimed, "Peter, it's extraordinary. You're a true artist." The next day, as the snowplows cleared the roads, customers began to trickle in. Each visitor tilted their head back to admire the ceiling, their faces alight with amazement. Some young women stopped by too, intrigued by the artist behind the work. Invitations to social outings soon filled my evenings, but painting took a back seat when the waitress, Mrs. Villano, didn't show up one day. "I can handle this," I assured her, stepping in to manage the tables while she ran the kitchen. To my surprise, we quickly became an unbeatable team. That night, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, skipping my usual ritual of rereading Viviana's letter. For the first time in what felt like forever, I woke to the genuine crowing of a rooster, though I later discovered it was Mrs. Villano's doing, coaxing the bird awake herself. Between meals, I shadowed her in the kitchen, absorbing her culinary techniques like a sponge. As she hummed romantic Italian songs while cooking, I found myself joining in. Soon our lessons evolved. She began teaching me Italian as we worked, and under her patient guidance, I picked up the language quickly. Our conversations shifted into her native tongue, and though I wasn't perfect, I could follow her stories and instructions with ease. When spring came, we planted an herb garden. By the time autumn rolled around, I had mastered winemaking and preserving food. What started as a brief arrangement stretched into 18 months of learning, growing, and bonding. One bright spring morning, I completed my final painting task and told her it was time for me to move on. She understood and sent me off with gifts, a handwritten recipe book and a case of her homemade wine. As we said goodbye, she handed me an envelope addressed to me. "When you get to San Francisco, find my cousin Anthony," she instructed. "Tell him you're the son I always wished I had." Taking my time, I journeyed to California, stopping to explore along the way. I gambled a bit in Reno, marveled at the Grand Canyon, and savored every moment. A month later, I found myself having lunch at Fisherman's Wharf. The next morning, I arrived at the address written on the envelope. The location was a quaint Italian restaurant nestled in Nob Hill, surrounded by similar eateries. The rich aroma of simmering sauces and fresh bread filled the air. The restaurant appeared closed, but I knocked on the door. A short, bald man in a chef's jacket peeked out from the kitchen and barked, "We're closed!" I knocked again, and this time he opened the door fully. "What do you want?" he asked, suspiciously eyeing me. I handed him the envelope. "This is for you," I said simply. He called out something in rapid Italian to someone inside. "Boss, the guy who knows everything is here," he hollered. A man named Tony emerged, glanced at the letter and laughed aloud. Thinking I didn't understand, he read it for everyone's amusement. "This crazy cousin of mine says I should hand over my kitchen to this stranger and let him cook." The staff laughed, their skepticism evident. Tony's attention shifted to my belongings, a cardboard box and some overstuffed bags. "What's in there? Your whole life?" he teased. I opened the box to reveal 4 bottles of wine. Curious, he poured himself a taste. After a sip, his demeanor changed. "Who made this?" he asked, clearly impressed. "I did," I explained. "I learned from Mrs. Villano." "Well," he said, nodding thoughtfully, "if you can cook like you can make wine, there might be a spot for you here." Tony called for his daughters, Gina and Anne-Marie. They walked in, a stunning pair. "Nice to meet you," I stammered, overwhelmed. Anne-Marie greeted me warmly, but Gina's skeptical glare said it all. "So, you're the legendary chef from Colorado," she said, her tone laced with sarcasm. The staff burst into laughter. From that day forward, they jokingly called me the legend. Tony put me to the test immediately. "Let's see what this legend can cook," he said, grinning. Gina remained critical, her sharp tongue keeping me on my toes, while Anne-Marie seemed more amused by the whole situation. When Gina scolded me in rapid-fire Italian, I responded in kind, surprising everyone. Our heated exchange ended when Tony stepped in. "Save it for later," he said, smirking. "Your boyfriend has work to do." "Boyfriend?" Gina snapped, storming off. "He's lucky if he's not washing dishes tomorrow." And just like that, my new life began. Tony let out a hearty laugh and quipped, "Looks like she's got her eye on you. Now get to it. There's soup and a couple of specialties waiting for your magic tonight." With bags full of fresh herbs and spices in hand, I sent up a silent prayer, greeted the crew with warmth, and got straight to work. As the evening unfolded, the kitchen hummed with lively Italian chatter as we prepared each dish. That night, my cioppino, a traditional Italian fisherman's stew brimming with Dungeness crab, shrimp, clams, and bay scallops, vanished from the menu within the first hour. Not long after, my linguine alle mollette, crafted with freshly caught crab from the nearby coast, was completely sold out. The highlight of the evening came when a waiter revealed that 2 guests had nearly come to blows over the last serving of my gnocchi smothered in house-made basil pesto. Tony barged into the kitchen, enveloped me in a bear hug, and declared, "We've got a star chef in the making." Anne-Marie chimed in enthusiastically, her pride unmistakable. Meanwhile, Gina remained cloistered in her office, buried in accounting. Though I had a waiter deliver samples of my creations to her, she kept silent. As the night drew to a close, I thanked the kitchen team for their efforts and felt a deep sense of belonging. This place was my new home. Still, I resolved to change one thing: the atmosphere. Mrs. Villano's advice echoed in my mind. Music enhances every meal. From that moment on, I vowed to encourage the team to sing while we worked. The Winston family built their fortune in real estate. Charles Winston I, the family's patriarch, made his mark during the Great Depression by focusing on foreclosures. Some critics claimed he seized farms more than he bought them. Following World War II, he shifted gears to suburban developments, converting farmland into uniform neighborhoods for returning soldiers with government-backed loans. The homes lacked originality, with only minor differences in their shutters or shingles. Charles Winston II, who despised being called Junior, carried the family business forward. During the economic downturn of the 70s, he quietly acquired options on struggling farms. By the real estate boom of the late 80s, that investment had more than paid off. Construction trailers turned into model homes, and money flowed freely. His son, Charles Winston III, better known as C.W., was quick to take the reins. He married Viviana, but their tropical honeymoon turned disastrous when both came down with a severe intestinal parasite. The resort denied responsibility, blaming local street food vendors. Once back home, C.W. announced bold changes for the company. My father had his time, but now it's my turn. Starting today, we're playing offense. Find me farmers eager to sell. However, CW3 lacked the sharp instincts of his forebears. Overconfident and self-absorbed, he ignored sound advice and overpaid for farmland. When the housing market bubble burst in year 7, he put everything on the line, pushing his assets to the limit. While others pulled back, CW took reckless risks, borrowing heavily to purchase a competitor's holdings. By the time the Great Recession hit, he was left with 500 barren acres and 50 half-finished homes, and no buyers. His desperation led to dubious schemes to offload inventory. Contractors went unpaid, lawsuits piled up, and banks began demanding repayment as collateral values plummeted. Calls for immediate payment became relentless. CW liquidated what little remained, including inherited stocks, insurance policies, and even his mother's jewelry. But it only delayed the inevitable. On the day his home was to be seized, CW poured himself a stiff drink, retrieved his father's cherished shotgun, and ended his life. His funeral featured a closed casket. Viviana discovered him just moments before a deputy arrived with eviction papers, cementing it as the worst day of her life. But her struggles didn't end there. CW's financial misdeeds soon surfaced, adding further chaos to her world. "You promised Dad you'd walk me down the aisle," my sister Danny insisted, her wedding just weeks away. There was one major hitch. My ex-wife Viviana, the groom's cousin, would be there along with her mother. 5 years had passed since I last saw her, and I had no desire to change that. But Danny's persistence wore me down, and I reluctantly agreed to fly to Chicago for her big day. At the gym, I couldn't help but admire my reflection in a sharp tuxedo. The timing was perfect as the limo pulled up outside the church. Bridesmaids and groomsmen lingered near the entrance, clearly curious if the estranged brother would make an appearance. Stepping out, I was met with the majestic strains of an organ. By my side were Gina and Anne-Marie, stunning twins in designer gowns, each featuring a daring thigh-high slit revealing intricate lace stockings. A month earlier, I had lamented my lack of a date, prompting both sisters to offer their company. When I jokingly said I couldn't choose between them, Gina, the older by 5 minutes, suggested I bring them both. Anne-Marie eagerly agreed, sealing the deal. When Danny later asked about my second guest, I teased her with a cryptic response. "You'll see when you're walking down the aisle." As I escorted the twins to the bride's family pew, cameras flashed, heads turned, and a low buzz of whispers filled the room. My mother's stunned expression was unforgettable. "Wow," someone murmured. "They look amazing." Curious glances and craning necks followed us down the aisle. Friends from school erupted into applause, adding to the spectacle. I spotted Viviana and her mother among the crowd. Time had been unkind to her. She appeared heavier and more tired, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Both twins gave me a kiss on the cheek before I resumed my role as Danny's brother. Meeting Wendy in the narthex, I complimented her glowing appearance. She smirked and replied, "You're impossible. No one can top that entrance." As the wedding march began, we took our places for the procession. Later, Dawn asked me to give a toast during the reception. Though public speaking wasn't my forte, I agreed to say a few heartfelt words. The evening became one for the memory books. I struggled to piece my thoughts together when my attention wandered to an older couple seated alone at the groom's table. Their quiet composure stood out in stark contrast to the lively chatter around the room. Their presence intrigued me, and I soon learned they were the groom's grandparents, having traveled all the way from Italy to be part of this joyous occasion. They didn't speak a word of English. Though I felt an instinctive urge to avoid engaging with them, their peaceful smiles and the ease with which they seemed to exist amidst a sea of strangers stirred something deep within me. My mind filled with imagined conversations, many involving me demanding an explanation from Viviana about her once earnest promise of "till death do us part." But instead, I chose a different path. In fluent Italian, I invited the couple to stand and embraced them warmly. Turning to the crowd, I asked everyone to lift their glasses in honor of this remarkable patriarch and matriarch who had joined us. The applause was thunderous as I called out, "Brad, Wendy, please join me here." A hushed curiosity swept over the room as I asked the guests to extend their right hands. I began recounting a poignant memory. On our father's deathbed, he had placed my sister's hands in mine, covering them with his own. His voice, heavy with the weight of finality, had said, "I won't be here to protect you, so I'm entrusting Peter to look after you. He will be your friend, your guide, your protector." Then, turning to me, he had added, "Do not fail me." Addressing the gathering, I explained that tonight I was passing that solemn responsibility to Wendy's husband. "John," I said, "I entrust Wendy's care to you. From this moment on, you are her best friend, her teacher, her protector. Don't let me down." The room filled with admiring murmurs, all except Viviana, whose sobs broke through the applause. Her mother's attempts to comfort her were in vain. As dinner came to an end, the quartet on stage began performing a series of adequate but uninspiring songs. Their music was pleasant, but the vocals lacked the power to truly capture the room. That's when Gina and Anne-Marie pulled me onto the dance floor, their hands tugging at mine with playful determination. Grabbing the microphone, they quickly dismissed the guitarist and drummer, daring the keyboardist to keep up with their infectious energy. Gina turned to the crowd and announced with dramatic flair, "Ladies and gentlemen, after 3 long years away in San Francisco, I present to you a legend." The room erupted in cheers. Years ago, we had spent countless evenings singing together at a small restaurant, and the old instincts returned effortlessly. For the next 2 hours, we serenaded Wendy and her new husband with heartfelt love songs. Gina and Anne-Marie's harmonies were flawless, filling the room with angelic melodies. The groom's grandfather stole the spotlight with a spirited tarantella, bringing everyone to their feet. The groom twirled his grandmother around the dance floor, their joy lighting up the evening. Dan and I stood with our mother, arm in arm, quietly basking in a sense of pride and contentment. During a break in the festivities, my former mother-in-law approached me cautiously. "Peter, could we have a word?" she asked softly. "Good evening, Mrs. Bennington," I replied coolly. "Viviana has been trying to talk to you," she continued, "but you've been avoiding her. She wants to apologize and ask for your forgiveness." "That won't be necessary," I said firmly. "It's been a long time since anything Mrs. Winston has said mattered to me." "Please, Peter," she implored. "Don't shut her out. Just hear her out." "No," I replied, my voice resolute. "But there is something I'd like to give you." Reaching into my wallet, I pulled out a worn piece of paper. "The day your daughter left me," I began. Her lawyer handed me this. I must have read it 1,000 times, my tears soaking its edges. But the tears are gone now, and so is the pain of her betrayal. "This," I said, handing her the paper, "is the last connection I have to your daughter. Take it. She's yours now." Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there as I rejoined the celebration. I never looked back. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.